In this tutorial, we're going to discuss variables and variable types. And we're going to be using Visual Basic, but the idea, the concept works for basically any programming language. And I would go as far as to say, if you're dealing with a programming language that doesn't have variables, you're probably not dealing with a programming language. So here we have Naruto, and we're going to identify variables inside of Naruto, which is one of my favorite animes. I have a lot of animes. This is one of my favorite ones. And so that's why we're going to use this to learn a little bit about variables and strings inside of VB. So let's play this. There's a variable right there, and it's a string. There's another string, and there's another string. So let's look at those strings. And here we are in PowerPoint. So we notice first that there is these scrolls, okay? So in the context, we're going to put this in the context of computer programming. So here, let me just get this box here, and I'm just going to put this here, and then we have our scroll. All right. There's our scroll. And then we have, on the scroll, we have some text. Let's just say some text there, okay? Let me just change the look of this so we can see that that's different, right? And so we have this text and we have that stuff on the scroll. Now, one of the main things we notice when we're watching that video is that when they open the scroll, something happens here. And let me, I'm coloring these differently for a reason because we want to be able to differentiate. Then when they open the scroll, there's smoke. All right. So this is our perfect analogy for, let's say, something like for strings. And understanding variables, and understanding functions inside of code. And again, today we're using Visual Basic, but this applies to all coding languages, whether it's Visual Basic, C Sharp, F Sharp, it doesn't matter, Python. It's basically, it's the same. This concept goes across platforms and coding languages. So here what we have is the scroll, the text, and that text, actually, we're going to change that from text to a string. So we're already getting a really good understanding of where strings are in this context. And then there's a function or action called open. When it opens, it actually generates this smoke. Now, we notice that the string is on the scroll. This scroll could have a name called, let's say, like, I can't remember all the scrolls inside of Naruto, but let's just say this was the, so this is the tree scroll. That's the name of the scroll, but that's not what's inside the scroll. What's inside the scroll is a string of characters that, you know, come together to be able to make whatever words that you have. And to really understand this, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this in a second. But if you can understand that, and then when they open the scroll, that's an action. They opened the scroll, did this action, and that action caused the smoke to come out, which then later on, someone comes out of that, okay? So if you watch the episode. So let's look at this actually in programming. So here I am inside of Visual Basic. Visual Basic is my programming language that we decide to use for this tutorial. And if you're new to programming, understand that there are so many different programming languages. There's so many different ones, but there are so many different things that are similar between all of them. So when I'm speaking about functions, I'm speaking about variables, I'm talking about strings, understand that that is universal to almost every programming language. And I would go as far as saying if you don't have variables, if you don't have functions, if you don't have that, at least those things, you're not a programming language. You're just a text editor, perhaps. So, And by the way, when the future comes and aliens come down and they have some new way of doing it, don't show them this video and say, "Hey, look what he said," and all of that's flipped on its head. So I'm just telling you. So here we are right now inside of Visual Basic. And when you start Visual Basic inside of Visual Studio, which is what we're using as our IDE, our integrated development environment, which is where we'll be working, you start off with this form. And this form is actually an application. It will run. So if I hit play here, you'll see my application runs. Now, it's not very exciting. Let me show you this. It's not very exciting, but it runs. So I'm going to close that. And let's get to creating our scroll. So inside of Visual Basic, I have here on the left-hand side all my tools. And I'm going to select a button. So I go over here to my tools, and I'm going to drag this button over here. And now I have this button. I'm just resizing the button. And I'm going to want this button to be called scroll, because this is going to be my scroll. So with this button selected, I can see the properties over here to the right. These properties here actually represent whatever I have selected. So this property here represents this button. And how can I tell? Because over here with this property, you see it says button 1, right? And if I were to select this form here, select the form, you can see these little handles on the form that tells me that that's selected. Also, if I go over here at the top of the properties window, you can see form is shown here. But I want to change this button. So I'm going to select that button, and I want to change a couple of things. I want to change the label here. Just like in our example, the scroll had a name. I want to give this button a name. And so I'm going to go all the way down to, let's say, to design. And I'm going to change this name here. So we gave our scroll a name. We're going to give our button a name. We're going to call that BTN scroll. Let's call it that. So this is our scroll. Now, what the button looks like here is just text. That's just text. That has nothing to do with what we're going to be using for coding, but I want my button to look a certain way, so I don't want it to just say button. I want the user, whoever's using this button, like Naruto, they use the scroll, so whoever's using this button, I want them to sort of have an idea of what this button is, so I want to put a name that's relevant to what the button does. So I'm going to go over here to text property, and I'm going to change that to open scroll. So whenever you click on this button, you'll open the scroll. All right. So like in our example here, or our analogy, let's say, we now have our scroll, which is our button. So I'm going to put this here, our scroll. That's called BTN scroll now. And then let's get our string. But before we get our, let's go ahead and get our string. Okay, so now I want to go ahead and go to the code inside of this button. There's a couple of ways I can do that. I'm going to show you the easy way, and then I'm going to show you the easiest way. Okay, so the easy way is first select the button. And because we already named it, remember, naming it is critical. You got to make sure you name that button first before you do this next action. So I'm looking at you right now. I stopped everything just so you can know that this is serious business. So I named that button first, and now I'm going to go over here to let me see. So I'm going to go over here to the properties area. Let me put this around here so you can see where my mouse is. I'm going to the properties area, and I'm not going to need my properties. I'm going to go over here. This is properties, that little button right there. And then this is events. So I'm going to select that event. And I can see all the events that's related to this button because I have this button clicked. So I see all the events related to that. I want the click event. So the easiest way is to double click here, and it automatically creates this here. It creates this function here. So let's talk about this function for a second. But first, let me show you the easiest way. That was the easy way to do it. I'm going to go back here. Now, here's the easiest way. I select my button, and instead of going over here and changing this, The easiest way is to select my button and double click it. It'll automatically write this out for me. And that's why we name it first. We name it because if you look, when I select it, it has the name of my button here, plus underscore clicked. It added that part to it. So let's talk about functions just for a second. And remember, we want to understand this on the very simple scale. We don't even need to understand this on the computer science scale. So this is why I'm not trying to use jargon so much, but you got to know the word function, you got to know the word variable, and you got to know the word string. Okay, so we have this function here. And let's look at what a function is in our example. A function is the fact, the action. And we had a action open when they open the scroll. So let's go ahead and duplicate that inside of our code here. So here we have this, we have our action, but currently our action doesn't do anything because whatever is in between this part and this part, like in between there, right here, whatever's in between here is what will happen when the button is clicked. But first we need to create our variable. And this is how we create variables inside of Visual Basic. We start off by using a keyword called dim. And a keyword is something that the computer needs, that our not the computer, but let's say our programming language has, and it keeps it for itself, meaning you're not allowed to use that word for a variable. And that's why it's in blue. Those are keywords. You can name it anything else you want, but you can't use those keywords for your own, let's say, classes, for your own variables or anything like that. You can name something that if you like, but you can't have the same variable name the same thing. In any case, let's backtrack a little bit. Here we are, we're creating our variable. So I say dim space, and then I'm going to say the name of my variable. So the name of my variable will be scroll text or scroll string. Okay, and you notice what I did. I capitalized the first and capitalized the second word. It makes it much more readable. If you want camel casing, you can just do something like this: smaller case than uppercase, Pascal casing, whatever you like, but make sure it's readable. So uppercase and then uppercase here. And then I'm going to say what kind of information goes inside of this variable. So when you look at our example here in PowerPoint, what goes inside of that variable? Strings or text, right? So here, let's go ahead and say that strings go inside of that variable. So I put space as string, and this is how we do it in Visual Basic. Other programming language will be a little bit different how you do it, but it's the same thing. Now we have ourselves a variable, which is a container that holds stuff. And we're saying the stuff we want it to hold is strings. So now we're going to put something in there. Oops. There we go. Let's put something in there. We're going to say quote, 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 unquote. That means string. Whenever you put quote, unquote, it means a string. And now we're going to put, let's put some Japanese words in there, if I can remember any. So let's try an easy one. Konnichiwa. There we go. Hello, good day. So now we have our scroll string. We have a string for our scroll. And then we have an action for our scroll, which is our function. And we're not going to talk about these arguments here. Don't worry about that, okay? Don't worry about any of that stuff. Just worry about this being the name of the function. That's just a name of the function. And this right here is just like this over here in a way. So don't worry about that so much. So this is how functions or subroutines start inside of Visual Basic. And this is the name of it. This is the argument. And we have return values and we have what we'll be using this function. But in any case, because we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of that right now, just understand this is our action and we know how to create that action. I'll do another video on functions, but I don't want to go into detail with that. So we have our string, and we now know how to make strings inside of Visual Basic, right? And so let's now look at the next thing we need to do in relation to our analogy. So we have our string, we have, and by the way, our string, we named our string something else. We named our string scroll string right there. So when we click on this button, we want to make the words come out, or we want to make smoke come out. And so let's just say here, we'll say konnichiwa, and then we're going to go jump right into English. There is smoke. Okay? So we got that. And now let's go back here. And so when we click this, this function will run. But what we want to be able to do is show that information someplace. So we're going to go over here and get a label. And this is what we're going to use to show the information. So we select the label. Remember, that's step 1. Step 2 is to name that label. So I'm coming over here, and I'm going to name that label down here. I'm going to name that label LBL, so I can know that it's a label. And I'm going to say message, LBL message. And then I don't want that word label in there when my user first opens my program. I don't want that word label there. So with that label selected, and I can see it selected up here, I'm going to go up here to the text, and I'm going to put some dots there for a placeholder, like 3 dots. And then when they run my program, I don't want form 1 being there. So I'm going to select my form. I can see it selected here. And I'm going to change that text to scrolls. Okay. So now at least it's looking a lot better. Now, even though I haven't done everything, but I know I don't have any problems, I'm just going to test my program to make sure it still works how I think it should work. Yes, nothing happens here. So if something happened here, I know there's a problem. Not that there's a problem with my code, but if you run your program and something happens that you didn't expect to happen, that's another kind of error. But everything happened like I expect, which was nothing. So I'm going to close that. And now I'm going to go back here, and we're going to add something in that label we just created. And that label was called, click this label. That label was called LBL message right here. Okay, so I'm going to go over here and type LBLM. And you notice what happens is the IDE starts to help me. It says, do you mean LBL message? Like the one you just made? And so all I got to do is hit tab, and it'll automatically fill that in for me. Now, what do I want to do with LBL message? I want to add, remember how I added those dots inside of LBL message? If I go down here, you see these dots I added? Well, how did I do that? I went to the text property, and then I added those dots. Well, you could do the same thing in code. Just remember, everything you see here is code, and everything you see here is code. It just gives you an easy way to do it using the interface. So if I wanted to do something in code, I can do this exact same thing in code, except I would have to say dot. I have to use what's called dot notation and then put stuff in there. Here's an example. So I have LBL message, right? Now I want to get to that text property. I just say dot and I put text. Oops, text. And now I want to put something in that text. Instead of dot, 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 I want to say it equals. What does it equal? Well, we have our string here, so we'll say equals that. And there we have it. We have a string there. And now let's check this out. Let's see if our application works. So I'm going to hit F5. And now what we expect is konnichiwa, there is smoke. There, boom, and there we have it. We have konnichiwa, there's smoke. And obviously there's screaming smoke, and smoke is capitalized for some reason. So there's our application. We understand about strings, we understand about the functions, and we were able to get an analogy that shows us, and we obviously have there is smoke there. Our function works here. That's our label, actually. That's our LBL message. And in this case, if it was a game, it wouldn't be a message. It would be actual smoke. And all of this logic applies. So hopefully that was helpful to you. Hopefully that gives you a more clear understanding of variables in a way. And I just want to show you one more thing that's probably going to really clarify this. When I say strings, variable strings, there's other kinds of variables, obviously. We're just talking about strings today. But I want to show you how strings are actually just characters that are put together as strings. So here I have my label, but if I wanted to get a character out of there, I can use either something called a substring. You see that? It says substring, so I'm using that dot notation again on a string. Or I'm going to show you a more straightforward way by creating another variable. So I'm going to create a variable. I have to hit dim, and I'm going to call that scroll char. Char meaning character. As not a string, I want a char, which is a character. And that's going to equal, it's not going to equal this, it's going to equal this, and I only want maybe the first letter. So that's what this means. This means I want this variable, which is here, and it's a string, but because I'm dealing with a char, it can't take the whole string, so I only want the first letter in this string. So I have to type scroll char, and then I'm going to say plus plus, because I want to put a quotes in there, which means char plus this string that I'm about to put is the first char or character of the string space. So this says scroll char, which should print out the K. K is the first character of the string konnichiwa, there is smoke. That's what we should see. And so now when I hit F5, and there it is. K is the first character of the string konnichiwa, there is smoke. Konnichiwa, honbonwa, whatever you want to put there. You can put any Japanese name, a Japanese thing, a word down there. You can even say ohayo gozaimasu. You can say something like that, or onomae wa wanan desu ka? What's your name, or anything like that. Or do you speak Japanese, or would you like some water, or whatever you want to do. We can go down the list, right? Whatever you want to put there, it's a string. So you can put anything there. I can literally put numbers and stuff here. I can put numbers there. I can put anything there. It's just a string. And so now whatever I put there, it's going to print out. As you can see here, which this doesn't make any sense, but you see, I put whatever there, I put numbers there, but those aren't numbers. There's just a string because I put them all inside of the quotes. So hopefully this was helpful to you. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys next time.